Hello. So today I'm going to be talking about role reversal. And role reversal basically is when you're a child that is forced to take care of your siblings at a young age. Parentification is when the child grows up taking on the role of the parent. Like that child is taking care of the parent and all of that. But I want to get into role reversal only because as a child, I wasn't allowed to be a child. I had to grow up really fast. Was often made to get up at all times of the night, and I had to get up for school at like maybe 5, 6 in the morning. I would have to get up at all times of the night to care for my crying brother, who was a baby at the time. I don't really think that was fair to me because, first of all, I didn't lay down and make that child. Second of all, I wasn't the parent. I felt like that was what my mother should have been doing since, that was her actual child. And the way my mother and her brother, my uncle, how they grew up was that my uncle used to brag, oh, well, I used to have to take care of your mom when I was 5 years old. I was changing her Pampers. That's just wrong on so many levels. I get, big brother, big sister, but not to the extreme of being forced to play mommy or daddy to your siblings. That's not right. I acquired many butt whoopings. I want to say something else, but I'm going to keep it tasteful. But, I endured a lot of abuse surrounding having to care for my brother. My uncle whooped me so severely one time because I did not put my brother's pamper on correctly. And he whooped me to the point where I was bleeding. Well, that's just, that was actually the norm in my household. That was how my mother whooped me, was to the point where I was bleeding. And it's crazy because back in the era when I was growing up, CPS really they're not like they are today. If they stepped into your house, if there was a report or a claim or an accusation that was made, they would just come into the house. And if they saw that your house was clean and full of food, like my mother's house was, they would just walk in, look around briefly, and then walk back out. There have been so many reports that was made on my mother growing up, with me being abused and all of the marks and stuff like that. But nothing was ever done. And, my mother was very, very blatantly disrespectful about me. She would tell them, there was times that she told CPS, well, if you want to take this little MF, you could take her. Of course, she didn't mean that, because when she lost custody of me when I was 15, when I begged CPS to remove me from her home, she was very angry about that, because, of course, she was no longer getting her welfare benefits for me, since I was no longer in the home and in the system. But I just want to, talk about role reversal a little bit, because it, not only was I abused physically, but, there was some psychological abuse in that, I would say. My boundaries were violated. I had no choice. I could not. So, there's a lot of other forms of abuse that plays a part with that. The main ones that I mentioned. But, not only was I abused, but I was humiliated as well. There was a situation where I was 13 years old. Sky, stop it. I'm back. I apologize for the noise with my dog. She heard something. So yeah. And yet we have another interruption from the dog. So, getting back to what I was saying, when I was 13, and even before I turned 13, at the age of 11 was when I was forced to care for my brother. And there was this one particular situation. Well, no, wait a minute. Actually, thinking back, there were a couple of situations. When I was 13, the one situation that stands out to me the most was me being humiliated in front of in front of my two friends that were sisters, and in front of some other neighborhood children, and in front of this creepy little boy named Edward, who actually shot me in the breast one time with a slingshot, and he used to just stare at me like he was just real creepy. But he was outside, along with my friends and some other neighborhood kids. And I asked my mother if I could go outside. She said, yeah, but take your brother with you. And so I could never really fully enjoy playing outside, because I had to stress out and worry about keeping an eye on my brother, who was very young at the time, and he moved like really fast. So if I turned and looked away briefly, he could be far off somewhere. There have been a couple times that I was stressing out because I had to find my brother and stuff like that around the apartment complex, which was kind of big. But yeah, so I didn't want to take my brother out. And, I was very vocal about that. I wasn't, rude, but I let my mom know, well, how come I can't just go out and play with my friends? Why do I always have to take my brother when I go out? She didn't like that. Why? I brought him down. Or did I bring him down? I'm trying to remember. But long story short, I didn't want to watch my brother. That's what it boiled down to. And she made it a point to come over to where I was. Luckily, I was wearing a bra. She came over to where I was and ripped my shirt open to the point where I was exposed. I mean, like I said, luckily I had on a bra, but I was exposed. I was embarrassed. I was upset. I remember crying, and I remember because, the neighborhood kids would always ask me, is your mom crazy? And I'd be like, well, no, maybe I'm just, I make her mad or something. I always made up excuses for her with the abuse. But that particular time, I think, was when my resentment for my brother, which it wasn't his fault that I felt that way towards him, but I felt resentment for my brother. One, because my mother showed favoritism when it came to him. And my mother had a way of devaluing me, telling me that I was dumb. She'd call me bees a lot of the time. Say I act just like my father's side of the family. They all crazy. You act just like them. How I had to always hear something negative regarding me. It was never anything positive. And even like when I went to school and I made good grades, she would never commend me on the good grades, but I would always hear something about, so I could, make a bunch of A's, B's. She would focus on the C's and D's, or, if I had like one C or one D, I would hear about that, but I didn't hear about the good grades. But yeah, that particular incident, I think, was when my resentment really manifested for my brother. Me and him are 11 years apart, and there had always been a really big age gap. So, of course, I'm 11 years older. He's a lot younger. But we were never really close. And I think, the age gap played a part. And the fact that, my mother was always, and it wasn't just my mother. It was my uncle as well, making me care for my brother as well. That wasn't fair to me. I've gotten over it now. It's been a long time since I've had time to process and kind of get over things, but I really hate that I was raised that way. So, it wasn't like a thing of, oh, I'm big sister and, I'm happy to be big sister. It was a thing of, okay, well, I carried this child for 9 months and boop, you're going to take care of him. And if not, I'm going to whoop your ass. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to humiliate you. And that was another thing when she gave birth to my brother and stuff like that, She was often out. She would go out at night to clubs and stuff like that, bringing different men home. But yeah, so there was never any respect for me. There was never any regard for me, my feelings. Emotionally, my mother was very unavailable. I could not talk to her about anything. I was not comfortable. I was scared of her and all of that. So, when you have those dynamics going on in your relationship, your parents should be the person that you can come to and talk to about anything, regardless of what it may be, how bad it may be. You should be able to come and confer with your mom, dad, or whoever that you're around at that time. And I didn't have that connection. I learned, early on that I was to be seen and not heard. So when my mom had company, I could say hello to the grown-up, but then, I had to go somewhere else. I do agree with that to a degree, as far as kids should not be around grown folks when they're having adult conversation, but it was like I didn't exist. So as long as I was there, I couldn't have an opinion about anything. I couldn't express myself. So I struggled for a long time with my identity because of that, because of a lot of the things. There was another situation when I was 13 where I didn't want to deal with my brother, and I got put out the house. Everything that she bought for me, she took from me. Said, you need to get out my house. Anything that I bought for you, I'm keeping or whatever. So, I pretty much had to cry and beg my mom to come back into the house and stuff like that. My mom was, she was something else. She was a piece of work. And even through all of that, I still had a certain amount of love for my mother, to where if anyone talked badly about her, I would get angry and I would defend her. I think I had Stockholm Syndrome. I honestly think I do, now that I think back on a lot of it, because the trauma bonding was what kept the connection to my family, if that makes any sense. My mom was she was a covert narcissist. So not a covert. The covert is the more discreet, the one who, is kind of hard to tell. The behind the scenes, mean to you, but nice to everybody else in public. So no, she was the opposite of that. She was a malignant narcissist. She was more out there in the open with it. Nothing like my ex, who was, hard to tell. And, with him, he was very charming. People automatically gravitated and liked him or whatever, not really knowing who he was. My mother, on the other hand, she just didn't give a damn. She was more out there in the open with the disrespect and the abuse. She didn't care who was around or any of the things. So, I resented my brother for a long time. I also resented my brother because I'm trying to remember how old I was. This time I might have been 11 or 12. I was made to give my brother baths, which I hated doing, but, I was caring so much for my brother that I think at one point, he probably thought that I was his mother. I mean, he never called me mom or anything like that, or mommy, but a lot of my time was spent taking care of him. But there was an incident where I was giving my brother a bath, and all of a sudden my mom accuses me of either trying to do something inappropriate with my brother or look at him inappropriate. I don't remember what it was, but that was another thing that set everything in motion. I was already angry about the fact that I was forced to care for him. But then, I'm being accused of being accused of being a damn pedophile. I don't like kids like that. I don't look at kids in no kind of inappropriate way. So to be accused of such a thing, that furthered the resentment. I think that was probably what really started. So that And then when I got humiliated in front of all my, my friends and the neighborhood kids and all of that, my shirt torn open, my bra exposed. And mind you, the bra was a pink bra. So you could see all my little goodies through that bra if you was looking hard enough. My mother had no love for me. And sometimes, I wonder why she even kept me, because she really and truly didn't raise me. I pretty much raised myself. She provided a roof over my head, yes. She provided food, although she was a horrible cook. And didn't teach me how to cook. I had to learn how to cook on my own. She bought me clothing. But as far as really being there for me, like a mother playing an active role in my life, she didn't do that. She would often accuse me of trying to get at the various strange men that she had running in and out her house. There was one that was secretly trying to get at me behind her back. But, I was accused of trying to flirt with him or trying to get with him. Which is crazy. I was her daughter, so why she would even be thinking like that about me said a lot. She was always really jealous of me when I was younger and all of that. And I could just never understand. Now that I look back on things, I hate the way that I treated my brother based on how I was treated by my mother, because and how I was treated by my uncle, because really them forcing me and them abusing me to care for him, that really was not his fault. He had nothing to do with that. But in a way, I sort of looked at him as though it was his fault, because I felt like if my mother would have never had him, then, maybe I wouldn't have been going through all of that. But it probably wouldn't have mattered whether she gave birth to him or not. If she gave birth to another kid and not him, I probably still would have been going through the same drama. So yeah, I have a lot of underlying resentment for my mother. Not the way that it was, but it's still prevalent. It's still there, because I don't deal with her today as a result of, all of the mistreatment and the abuse and all of that. So it wasn't just a role reversal thing that, I had an issue with. It was everything overall, all of the abuse overall, and how she treated me and how she disregarded me as though I was nothing. And, even at a very young age, she always made me feel unwanted and unloved. Sky, stop. Yeah, at a very young age, she often made me feel unwanted and, unloved. If you have someone telling you something negative about yourself all the time, that stays with you. That's a form of abuse as well. So people always think that abuse is physical. No, it's not just physical. It's emotional abuse, financial abuse, verbal abuse, which I got a lot of that. As I got older, I just kind of learned or tried to learn how to stay out of my mother's way. But, once I got to a certain age, she told me that she wasn't going to whoop me anymore. That because I was a certain age, I was old enough for her to start boxing me. And that was exactly what she did when I was 14. And she tried to throw me over a 2-story banister. And I was a little bitty thing back then. I was very petite. Very athletic, but very small. And it took for me I had to pretty much try to hold all of my weight down to keep her from throwing me over the banister that night. And I think if she was successful, she would have thrown me over. But I screamed, and one of my neighbors, this girl that I went to school with, that I was not really cool with, I liked her mom. Her mom was, heavily into church, and she did hair outside of her home. She was the one that heard me screaming, and she was the one that called police. Police came to the apartment. They asked me, was I happy? I said no. They kept me there. I didn't understand that. I had a busted lip and all of that. I had marks to prove that she had abused me. So why would you keep me there? But yeah, so, I told law enforcement that, I wasn't happy. And, my mom tells them, well, that little bitch shouldn't have been going through my things. And I wasn't going through anything of hers. She accused me of going through her diary. You had a lot of paranoia, a lot of insecurities going on, especially when it came to me. I don't know what her deal was with me, but so yeah, I was kept there. And I was a product of teenage pregnancy. I had my very first child when I was 15. I was pregnant at 14, had her at 15. The man that got me pregnant, it was statutory rape. I didn't see it that way then, because although I consented, but when you're 14, you really don't know. You don't know what the hell you're doing. You're not mature enough to be making